Good afternoon. It's Saturday, the 11th of July. I'm Laura Cornfield, and this is IBA News, broadcasting from Jerusalem. The defense establishment is refusing to confirm or deny reports out of Lebanon that an Israeli drone crashed off the shores of Tripoli this morning. The Lebanese army published video on its official internet page and photographs on Twitter of the unmanned aircraft. It claims to have pulled out of the Mediterranean Sea near the northern coastal city around 8:30 a.m. After examination of the UAV, they say it was determined to be of Israeli origin. There have been prior reports of other spy craft being downed in Lebanon, which the IDF generally declines to comment on, although it did confirm a crash in southern Lebanon 10 months ago. It said resulted from technical issues that occurred during routine operations along the northern border. Staying in Lebanon, where the leader of the Hezbollah terror organization is boasting that recent successes by the army in neighboring Syria to counter insurgent attacks proves that, contrary to widespread assessment, the days of his ally, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, are not numbered. Sheikh Hezbollahs Nasrallah made the remarks during a televised address during commemoration of International Jerusalem, or Al-Quds Day, that is observed annually by much of the Arab and Muslim world to demonstrate support for the Palestinians. According to the Lebanese Shiite leader, the Syrian army, backed by Hezbollah, has regained its momentum since having lost most of the Idlib province to the Islamist alliance that includes the al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front. Nasrallah, who is sponsored by Iran, said that Syria's army has taken back the initiative across most front lines and that those hoping to bring down the regime will endure a long war that will never bring them to their goal. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif are using their first full day of renewed overtime at nuclear talks today to whittle away at disputes that have led to 4 extensions of the latest round. All 7 nations at the talks agreed to set a new target day of Monday for an accord after realizing that they could not wrap up the talks as they hoped to do so by yesterday. Any deal is meant to clamp long-term restrictions on Iranian nuclear programs in exchange for sanctions relief for Tehran. Kerry commented on the talks in the middle of long discussions yesterday.
We have a couple of different lines of discussion that are going on right now, but I think it's safe to say that we have made progress today. The atmosphere is very constructive. We still have a couple of very difficult issues, and we'll be sitting down to discuss those in the very near term, this evening and into tomorrow. But I think we have resolved some of the things that were outstanding, and we've made some progress.
Italy's foreign minister vowed that his country would not be intimidated after a deadly explosion early this morning killed 1 person and heavily damaged the Italian consulate in Cairo. Egyptian officials said that at least 1 person was killed in the blast and 4 others injured. The victim has not yet been identified, but his limbs were severed, suggesting the victim was close to the explosion. An Italian diplomat said the consulate was closed at the time and no staff members were injured in the blast. A security official said the exact cause of the explosion was still unclear and there has been no claim of responsibility yet. However, Egypt is in the midst of a rising wave of violence in recent weeks between government forces and Islamic militants. One security official said investigators are looking into whether an explosive device was placed under a car parked near the building. Back here at home, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu emerged from a half-hour meeting just before the Sabbath with the Mengistu family, saying that the government will do everything to return their son Avram home. Netanyahu added that Israel is dealing with a very cynical and cruel enemy, but that the government will not just sit back while its citizens are being held captive. Netanyahu's visit came after a 10-month-long court gag order was lifted on the case, and Israeli security officials said that a prisoner swap was not on the table for discussion. Mengistu reportedly has mental health issues, and it is not clear if he intentionally entered Gaza or did so by mistake, as his family claims. The other Israeli being held in Gaza is an unidentified Arab citizen with a similar history of mental illness, who also apparently entered Gaza of his own free will several months ago. The United Nations Human Rights Council recently convened in Geneva to approve a resolution backing the controversial McGowan-Davis report on the 2014 50-day conflict with Gaza. Political science professor Gerald Steinberg attended the session and spoke to IBA's Ari O'Sullivan about the behind-the-scenes activity.
This was one of those meetings that takes place periodically, 3 times a year usually, at the UN Human Rights Council. That's what they call themselves. This time it was the presentation of the report, which went through this torturous process. We knew what the results were going to be. It was presented by a judge from the United States, Marion McGowan-Davis, inherited from William Schabas, who was originally appointed, but then caught for not revealing his connections, his ties, his work for the PLO. The report has a lot of the contents that's similar to the Goldstone report, but without a lot of the teeth. The teeth were taken out partly during the process of writing the report. There are a lot of allegations of Israeli war crimes, but it's not a process by which they can now go to the International Criminal Court. That's the way the Palestinian leadership had expected it to go, but it didn't quite go that way. But the UN Human Rights Council is still a very problematic body. And the vote was something like, there are 47 members, there were 46, I think, that voted yes. No, there were 41 that voted yes, 1, the United States, that voted no, and 5, including India, that abstained. For a resolution that was somewhat watered down on a report that was really lacking any credibility. So it's still a theater in which the Islamic bloc, the majority there, Iran, Syria, talking about Israeli war crimes. It's very surreal, the whole process, to hear these representatives of regimes that are slaughtering thousands talking about how Israel is violating international law. Nobody takes it very seriously, but it does get quoted and used in the boycott movement by people who either are malicious and deliberate in this or are ignorant about the details.
Many people in Israel dismiss the Human Rights Council, but do they have an impact?
I certainly wouldn't want to dismiss it as irrelevant. It is a farce, but it's not always obvious as a farce. It's not to others who are not as detailed in their observations. So this time what happened, and it was a change. The UN process went through the usual motions of condemning Israel and presenting all these claims. So you're sitting in the UN Human Rights Council chamber, and you hear hour after hour of allegations. But what happened this time was somewhat different. Along with UN Watch, NGO Monitor brought a group of American and British and other experts, generals who had fought in wars, not so much to talk about Israel, but to talk about the nature of fighting a terror war and how complex it is, and how do you tell civilians apart from combatants, and how the UN and the NGO fact-finding apparatus never gets it right. To have Colonel Richard Kemp, who led the British forces in Afghanistan, to have generals from the United States, professors of international law who've had military experience like Jeffrey Korn and others talking about their experience and their knowledge. We packed a very large room next to the council chamber in those presentations. And we had journalists there, we had delegates from other countries who had never heard this before. So it does change the game to some degree. It needs to be done over and over again. So it's a serious theater, and we need to expose the absurdity of the way it goes, and this is part of that process.
France is threatening to bring the Palestinian solution to the Security Council. Do you think that the United States will veto this now?
I've seen it before, and I'm quite cynical about the way that these moral values are used. I'm used to it, unfortunately. But to see, for instance, a member of the European Parliament who'd never been there before, who is part of a liberal bloc, this is someone who expects to see human rights being taken seriously, as they usually are in terms of the rhetoric of the European Parliament, if not usually the actions. And she sat there and she listened to this, and she said, I've never seen anything so absurd in my life. How do you stand sitting here? And to have these Americans and Richard Kemp say the same thing. The reaction of any, I would say, fair-minded, normal, intelligent person to this is that this really is a theater of absurd. But it's a bubble. And the same people you see, I talk to the same European officials. Usually Europeans are particularly deeply into this as part of their moral and normative approach to politics. They think that everybody should be like the European Union. It's sort of pre-Greece, but in any case, that's the way they look at it. The Americans, the Canadians are somewhat more realistic in their approach. So having these kinds of conversations with them, taking them out of this bubble, and the UN officials, there are hundreds or thousands really of UN officials in Geneva, It's a very strong part of the Geneva industry. And to confront them with the fact that they're living in a bubble which is completely divorced from reality is part of the process.
As the controversy over the nation's use of the gas reserves continues, Professor Gil Troy told IBA's Eli Wogel that the important thing is how Israel can make sure that everyone benefits from it.
Experts far smarter in this area than I say that the discovery of gas off the Mediterranean coast could be a game changer for Israel, could make Israel one of the wealthiest nations in the world. The challenge, a Zionist challenge, a political challenge, is as we evolve from the socialist utopia of the 1950s to the startup nation of the 1990s and 2000s, to the gas paradise of the 21st century, what about the little guy? We've seen in the last 30 years we have a remarkable ability to let remarkable Israelis become remarkably rich. But do we have the ability also to remember the little guy and gal? Do we have the ability to remember not just the Shoah survivor, but more important, the middle class and lower middle class Israeli who wants to work, who wants to have the dignity of earning a wage and not getting a freebie? And how does a modern economy, and this is a problem the United States is having too, how does a modern economy figure out that it's going to be high-tech, it's going to be knowledge-oriented, but it also has to have a broader distribution of wealth?
But we're talking about billions and billions of dollars that will filter into the system from this gas exploration. At the end of the day, we're all going to be better off for it.
If we are lucky, we will have a Ronald Reagan type situation where he said, don't cut up smaller and smaller pieces of the limited pie, let the pie grow. And part of letting the pie grow is not being afraid of millionaires and billionaires. It's not being afraid of the wealthy who often have incentives to take the risk, to go ahead. I'm in favor of a capitalist society, but I'm also in favor of a Zionist ethos which says, how do we ensure the dignity of the human being? How do we ensure the dignity of the laborer, of the worker? How do we ensure the dignity of all Israelis, Arabs and Jews, rich and poor alike?
Greece's negotiators are in Brussels today, armed with their reform proposals and parliamentary backing to seek a third bailout. The Greek finance minister is at this hour meeting with his 18 colleagues from the other Eurozone countries to discuss the Greek proposals, which contain tax hikes and deep spending cuts, including on pensions, that the 6-month-old left-wing government had so far resisted. The initial reaction of European officials to the Greek plan was positive, saying it provides a basis for talks. Without a deal, Greece, already desperately low on cash, its banks shut for the past 2 weeks, and its population restricted on cash withdrawals, risks crashing out of the euro. It would be the first country to do so, and the consequences for the country and global markets would be unpredictable. However, the austerity measures the Greek government is proposing are so far from the Prime Minister's own party policies that he suffered dissent from within in a late-night parliamentary debate that culminated in a vote early this morning, with 251 votes in favor and 32 against. It comes less than a week after 61% of voters opposed similar reforms proposed by creditors in a referendum last Sunday. Civil rights leaders in the United States are celebrating the removal of the Confederate battle flag from the state capitol grounds of South Carolina amid cheers from the crowd. The solemn ceremony follows an emotional debate over the last 3 weeks since a racially motivated massacre of 9 black worshipers by a white gunman at a Charleston church. The flag will be stored in the relic room of the State Military Museum in Columbia, alongside other artifacts carried 150 years ago by Confederate soldiers during the American Civil War. The banner represents Southern pride and heritage to many, although for others it is a painful symbol of slavery and racism. The Jewish Agency held its annual Board of Governors meeting recently in Tel Aviv, where immigration to Israel was naturally a main topic of conversation. IBA's Eli Wogel asked the agency's Deputy Director General, Shai Felber, about the state of Aliyah this year, including from 2 countries that don't usually get talked about, Brazil and Italy.
Overall, we see increase in Aliyah numbers all around the world, in Europe, in Latin America, Brazil, Argentina. Obviously, we see in France increasing numbers. What we see that people are more interested in Aliyah than before. Okay? So sometimes it resonates into the Aliyah numbers, but we see that people are coming to us, are approaching us, are asking more and more questions. We are opening more Aliyah files all over the world, and it's something we're very proud of, obviously.
Do you feel that they are afraid about living in their own country, or are they infused with a feeling of aliyah?
I think it's a combination of what we call the push factors and the factors that are bringing people from their own personal reasons. So in certain places you got economical crisis, obviously. In certain places you got anti-Semitism rising, but in certain places we are investing a lot in aliyah programs and promoting aliyah. But eventually what's happening is that people are choosing Israel because there's something that has started before. Usually you don't make aliyah only because you're running from something. You can go to other places today. You can live to North America, to Australia. But there should be something that in your heart you understand and you know why to come to Israel. So I think all the push factors eventually will make you choose to go to the right place if we've been to Israel before in Israel programs, if your Jewish community activities, if you've been involved in, if you experience life in Israel, and eventually if we did the utmost that we can in order to explain to you why Israel is the best place for you to live in as a Jewish person.
Do you feel that programs like Birthright or Masa are helping to inspire them to make aliyah?
Yes, definitely yes. We see those numbers in France, for example. We see those numbers in the former Soviet Union. And I will tell you also that maybe those numbers of Al-Masa, Birthright, and onward are transformed into the aliyah. But I have to say that even if it will not make you to choose to live in Israel, for me it's good as well because you come back to your country as a more active Jew. Because you've been to Israel, you care more, you know more, and you understand better. Therefore, all of those programs definitely bring something back to you on your Jewish life, either to aliyah, from the one hand, but secondly, to be part of your Jewish community in any way that you will choose, obviously.
I hear that there's been a doubling of aliyah numbers from Italy and Brazil. Can you explain what's going on there?
We've just been finishing last week a big aliyah fair in Brazil, in Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, with hundreds of people coming and inquiring about aliyah. I think we are trying to identify what's happening in Brazil, and we're identifying, first of all, the economical situation in Brazil, the security situation in Brazil, obviously the World Soccer champions and the Olympic Games that are coming soon are increasing the financial gaps in Brazil. Some people find it difficult to cope, also crime. So, and we feel that today people in Brazil are not convinced about the future of the country. There's political instability, and you take all that with people that have been to youth movement as a nature of the community, people that are organized in the community, then again, when the push factors are coming, you ask yourself, Israel. So I think internal reasons in Brazil are causing those aliyah numbers. In Italy, I think it's overall what's happening in Europe. I would say the uncomfortable situation that the